I need a volunteer to help me out with a test of physical strength. I'm going to call someone's name out of the box to help out with this next problem. Here's the job I have for you. I want you to come around back behind the table, and I want you to put these gloves on. Okay? And once you get the gloves on, you're going to hold your hands at arm's length like this. No bending of the elbows. Okay. And you're going to lift this jar off the table. You're going to squeeze like so and lift that jar. She's losing it. And it turns out no one in the class is capable of lifting this and holding this. You can and you were bending your elbows a little bit, by the way. Let's do it totally straight. Totally straight? Not happening. Not happening. And we're going to do a calculation to show why, in fact, that's true. But thank you very much. Let's have a hand for Kimberly. I'm going to do a force analysis of this problem and say, how much force does the person apply to lift the jar? Okay? We're going to do that calculation. We have two stories that we're going to tell. We have a motion story, and we have a force story. And if we assume that she's lifting the jar, but she's not trying to hurl the jar towards the ceiling, okay? She's lifting it, but it's not going very far. I mean, you saw it took her a while, and she, at the best, just got it up a tiny little bit. What can we say about the acceleration to a pretty good approximation? 0. You can say it's 0. And actually, if you want to know how much force is required, typically mean the minimum. And the minimum force is the amount that you can just barely pick it up. But it's not really going anywhere. You just moved it ever so slightly. The acceleration is essentially 0. So it's another one of these static-y kind of problems. Acceleration is equal to 0. Oh, heavens. What's that tell me about the force? F net equals 0, right? So net force is equal to 0. That's the start of my force picture. Now I want to draw a free body diagram of this situation. Okay, and think about this. Forces which are acting, okay? There's actually 5 different force vectors which we're gonna draw. What's the first? Weight. And weight acts downward. There better be an upward force in order to counteract that. Where's the upward force coming from? After it's off the table, there's no normal force from the table anymore. Where is the upward force coming from? Friction, which is why, gloves. You can do it like this. This isn't so bad. But if you're wearing gloves, you can't. The upward force is from friction. So I got a friction force, which is upward. And I get 2 components of that friction force because I have 2 hands, one on each side of the jar. Now, there's horizontal forces as well, okay? What are the horizontal forces? Normal forces. My 2 hands are pushing against the sides of the jar. And the sides of the jar are straight, and so the forces are just perpendicular to it. And so you get a normal force from one hand, and I get a normal force from the other hand, like so. What can you say about these 2 normal forces? They're equal, because since the net force is equal to 0, the sum of the x components of the force has to be equal to 0. So that tells me that these 2 normal forces have to be equal to each other. Oh, we can say something else about the forces as well. We have a relationship between the friction force and the normal force. What's my relationship? Friction force is equal to mu times normal force. Static or kinetic, if she's actually succeeding in the task. Static, because there's no sliding. So it's a static coefficient of friction times the normal force. So let's write down this equation. Sum of Fy is equal to 0. Okay? Let's think about that. I've got one friction force which points up. I've got a second friction force that points up. And I've got a weight force which points down, right? So let's think about how we add this. We take the y-axis, and we say, let's take my first positive component, F, plus a second F minus W, which is equal to 0. The sum of the y components of the force is equal to 0. So that tells me 2 times the friction force is equal to the weight force. Oh, progress is being made. The friction force is equal to the weight force divided by 2. Do I know the weight force? Yep, because I've got, it's 5 kilograms. And the weight force is the mass times gravity, times g, 9.8 meters per second squared. And then it's divided by 2, so I get 5 times 9.8, which is 49 divided by 2, which is 24.5 newtons. That's what the force is going to be equal to. By the way, I want to compare that to like forces we've seen earlier. That's darn near enough to make the Corvette go forward, actually, interestingly. But anyway, coming back, here's my force. And the way you produce the friction force is by applying a normal force. This is ultimately what we want to know. And the normal force is equal to the friction force divided by the coefficient of static friction. The coefficient of static friction is 0.2. So the normal force has got to be 24.5 divided by 0.2, which turns out to be approximately 125 newtons. 125 newtons is a force of about 25 pounds in round figures. And pushing at the end of your arm with a force of 25 pounds, can't do it. Like this, oh yeah. Like this, not happening. And that is a torque problem. And you think about the tendons which are making that happen. They're way up here. The force is applied way out there. Not so effective. That's a piece we'll come back and talk about when we talk about Chapter 8.